Pretty much wherever you are in Belfast, you can see two yellow giants known as Samson and Goliath, working cranes that dominate the city skyline. Now scheduled historic monuments, these cranes remind us of a time when shipbuilding was king in Belfast. It's 100 metres to the top. Today, Harland & Wolff, who own the shipyards, build offshore wind farms and oil platforms. They've really diversified. But if you'd come up here in 1909, the view would have been completely different. From the end of March that year, the giant hulls of the Titanic and her sister ship, the Olympic, began to take shape. Soon, like Samson and Goliath, they could be seen from anywhere in the city. At the height of construction, up to 30,000 men and women worked here, and it was with a huge sense of pride that they fashioned the most advanced ocean-going liners of their age. But that pride turned to shock and shame as the Titanic sank on her maiden voyage.
I think it can really be described as grief. Grief that people that you knew have been lost, but also grief that no matter how well you built the vessel and you built it as best as you knew how, it simply wasn't enough to stall off that huge loss of life.
Amongst the dead was Thomas Andrews, one of the leading naval architects of the day. With others, he'd designed the Titanic in Harland & Wolff's drawing office on Queen's Island. It's where I've brought his grandnephew, John Andrews, today. Why was he on that first trip, do you think?
Well, he was leader of the Guarantee Group. It was a group of men to iron out any problems that there were.
So if you design it, you've got to go on it and prove it's safe.
Well, it was just to iron out any difficulties or things that, I'm sure there were things that weren't quite right, but I think there were 8 of them. They were all lost, and it wasn't talked about a great deal until recently.
And why do you think that's changed? Because it's now seen as something quite optimistic, isn't it?
Well, I think it's the passage of time. It's the discovery of the ship at the bottom of the sea, which is relatively recent, and also the film, which was a huge success.
Harland & Wolff became known as the shipbuilders to the world, and the Titanic was to be the largest passenger steamship ever built. You really get a sense of the scale of the project when you come here to the original dry dock. It's absolutely immense. In the first half of the last century, Harland & Wolff were hugely successful shipbuilders. But gradually, as commercial air travel developed, there was less demand for ocean-going liners, and the industry slipped into decline. Una Riley's great-grandfather worked on the Titanic as a carpenter. More than 20 years ago, she helped found the Belfast Titanic Society, but at first it was impossible to get anyone interested.
Their initial reaction was, how can we celebrate a disaster? There's only a disaster associated with this ship, but we were trying to get people to look behind that and see the achievement. The Titanic is probably the best known ship in the world, apart from the Ark perhaps, and the rest of the world were getting very excited about this, and it wasn't happening in Belfast. And then with our little start on the project, people began to see Titanic attracts people. So let's use Titanic as a hook to bring people here to see another side of the history that doesn't include the Troubles.
Where ships were once built, more than £5 billion is being spent transforming a huge swathe of land into housing, heritage attractions, and a science park. The Titanic's original tender ship, the Nomadic, is back in Belfast for restoration. And Harland & Wolff's historic drawing rooms are to be refurbished. The development will be christened Titanic Quarter. The word Titanic is finally back in vogue.
I mean, we're talking about iconic structures, iconic buildings that will be significant to the city, as these cranes are, straddling the city. I mean, whenever you see them, you will say, I'm back in Belfast.